Hi, everyone. Today I wanted to talk to you about how to use a multiplication chart. Earlier in one of my videos, when I mentioned templates, I discussed the use of a multiplication chart. I also, if you watch the video about why dyslexics' brains are like pinball machines, some of the things that I explain here, that it will make sense if you've seen that video. I'm going to include links to both below. So for children with learning disabilities, typically in IEPs or 504s, we just do a catch-all of, oh, let them use a calculator. And at one point, that's fine. In high school, that's cool. But in grade school, there's a lot of pushback on it just giving a kid a calculator. And we do want them to know some basic multiplication facts. When we allow a calculator to be used in high school, it's because a lot of the answers are in decimals or we're multiplying really large numbers. We really don't want a student doing algebra 2 that doesn't know 6 times 5. So we want to start here. So I highly encourage that if you have a grade school kid and you're going to do a 504 and an IEP, that instead of trying to ask for a calculator, ask for a multiplication chart. You can buy a bunch of them that are laminated on Amazon, or this is a printable. I just Googled and I found it. And then what we do is we just slide it into a clear file sheet that you can put in binders. And that way you can get a dry erase marker and mark all over it, because I'm going to show you how to use it by marking on it. Okay, so why do I prefer multiplication charts than just a calculator? It's because it does reinforce number relationships. And so if you do put a plastic sheet over this, you can show and you can have your student mark it up. I'm just going to use some highlighting tools. And if you look at your threes, you can show them what the pattern is, that you are adding 3 each time. And you can do the same thing with 6s, that you're just adding 6 each time. We also want to make sure that they understand some basic number facts. So for example, that if a number has a factor of 2, and vocab is maybe not the best, so we try to explain what a factor is. But if it has a factor of 2, look what's true about all these numbers, because they're written out and your student can see them. They're all even. And if you have a factor of 5, what's true about all the numbers? Well, you can show them, look, all the numbers are going to end in a 5 or a 0. They're not just taking your word for it. They can see it. They have proof in front of them. And then of course, one of our favorites is tens. How do you know if a number is divisible by 10? How do you know if a number's factor is 10? Many ways to ask that question. If you're reducing a fraction, how do you know if you can reduce by 10? It's all here. So it allows them to see patterns. Same thing with the 11s. We love the 11s. So again, it's not something that they're necessarily just memorizing. Ultimately, that's the goal. It's because it's getting reinforced every time they use this multiplication chart. All right. Now, because students sometimes have problems tracking, that's why you do want them to be able to mark on it. You maybe want to have a straight edge, like a ruler. So let's do something on the easier side. If they had to figure out what 8 times 7 was, what you would want them to do is you would want them to take a marker or a highlighter, and you would want them to go to 8 in one of the rows, circle that, and then now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do a 7. And then wherever they intersect or they cross, that's your answer. Now, for a variety of reasons, especially people that are dyslexic, even dysgraphic, we don't track well. We don't see things lined up this way. So that's why you do want to encourage them to mark it, or to get a ruler at least for the horizontal lines, or maybe you can get a ruler for the vertical, but I like to mark it. It's kinesthetic. And so the child is more engaged. And when you're dealing with someone that's ADHD, you always are trying to get them to be more engaged. So instead of them just staring at something, you can show them. A lot of times with my students, I just have them put a finger on the 7 and a finger on the 8, and I have them drag their fingers down and over until they meet, so that they're still doing something. And that means I know they're paying attention to me. So that's just how we would use a multiplication chart to multiply. But the multiplication chart can do so much more than just multiplying. It can help us with division. So we use it to divide. So let's say we want to know what 35 divided by 7 is. So you go to the 7 row or column. You always want to do it the same way each time. So I usually like to start with rows. That's because most of my students, we use a ruler to do this. Also, we read horizontally. So I'm always trying to encourage your eyes doing the same thing that you would normally do in another subject. So you go to the 7 row and you're going to look for where you have 35. So here's 35. And then all you do is you have the student drag their finger, literally drag the finger, because again, we have problems tracking, drag the finger up to 5. And so that's how you know that 35 divided by 7 is 5. Okay, let's do another one just to make sure it's super clear. Let's do 48 divided by 6. So we are going to go to the 6th row and we're going to either put a ruler over it or we're going to circle it, something that can get our attention. And then within this 6th row, you're looking for 48. And here is where 48 is. And then you just have your student put their finger on 48 and look up or trace up so they can see it's 8. So that's how we do this with division. Okay, another thing that I use the multiplication chart for is to find a greatest common, that did not look like a C, a greatest common factor. So let's say that we are trying to reduce a fraction, or maybe they're just simply asking for what the greatest common factor is. So and let's just start with just 2 numbers. So let's start with 21 and 77. So have your students start with the smallest number and have them kind of go through each row. And this is where it's really nice to have a ruler. So let me attempt to build a ruler. Okay, there's my ruler. So you have them take the ruler and you go, okay, is there a 21 in this row? There's not, and you move down. And you keep moving down until you see 21. Okay, so right now I found the 21. Now you say, okay, guys, is there a 77? And there's not. So therefore, you do not have a common factor of 3. So we're going to keep moving on. We're going to keep moving this down. And so far, I'm still not seeing it. And then here we go. I finally see a 21. And then now I'm going to look for the 77. And what do you know? There it is. So now I could say that I have a common factor of 7. It may not be the true GCF. There's a method that we can do that. Again, if you watch the template video, it shows you the method. It's called the cake method to find the GCF and the LCM. But this is how you start it. This is how you start finding common factors. Okay, let's do another one. So let's just call it a common factor. You're reducing and you're just trying to figure out what you can reduce by. Now, obviously, if the number is even, you can reduce by 2, but sometimes you're dealing with larger numbers and it just wouldn't make sense to reduce by 2. So for example, if we were given 44 and 66, well, they're even, but if your child is struggling with your math facts, telling them to divide by 2 may not be as easy for them, and that's okay. So what we would do is, again, we would go down in rows and I tell them, okay, well, if these are large numbers, maybe instead of starting up on top, maybe we should start on the bottom. because those are pretty big numbers. So I'm at 12s and I don't see the 44 because I'm always looking for the smallest first, but at the 11s, I do. And then I'm checking and I do see the 66. So I know that I have a common factor of 11. So let's pretend that we are being asked to reduce this fraction. So we would show that we need to divide both the top and the bottom by 11. They need to write it out. Especially if you're ADHD, if you don't write it out, you've probably gone already 3 steps ahead in your brain and your hand has not caught up. So one of the reasons with ADHD, we try to get the brain to slow down, and we do that by forcing our students to write. So we would write this and we would say, okay, if you look, you already know that 44 divided by 11 is 4. And that 66 divided by 11 is 6. And then we can do the same thing over again. We could say, okay, well, is there another common factor? Is there another GCF? Well, we know the numbers are even, and that's kind of really where that first rule comes in, is if it's even, we can divide by 2. And you can always say, well, let's just double check, right? And sure enough, 4 and 6, they're in that row. So we would divide by 2 and again, write it out, slow that brain down. What you do to the bottom, you do to the top, you say the same cue every time, and you have the answers. So that's why that works. So with kids with ADHD, the brain is going so quickly that that you do want to write it out. But more importantly, one of the reasons we want to use the multiplication chart is because of the recall issue. It takes a lot of energy for students with ADHD to recall information. And when they're having a bad day or their medication is wearing off, if your child is medicated, then you could spend 5 minutes trying to have them recall what 4 times 3 is. And that's usually not the point of the problem. That's one step in it. So by having them use the multiplication chart, you're not waiting 5 minutes for them to come up with 12. You're also not giving them the answer because that doesn't help. And you don't want to give them the calculator because again, it's not helping them truly learn it and build that bridge to recall that information. So you have them use this so we can at least get to this quicker, and it reinforces the information, and then we can worry about the remaining parts of the problem. Same thing with dyslexics. With dyslexia, in terms of number, if you're dyslexic and you're not you don't have dyscalculia, if you're just dyslexic, we tend to flip the order of numbers. 9s and 6s look a lot alike to us. So that's why a multiplication chart can be handy, is that it forces us to go in a specific order and really focus on, okay, well, that's a 6. So I know I'm in this row. And if we see that it's 54, if we see that, don't do 6 times 9, those are bad. Those are very bad for dyslexics. Let's do 6 times 10. That's too easy. Let's do 6 times 8. By tracing it, we can see that it's 48. And if we see it, we have a better chance of actually writing 48 instead of writing 84. So that's why it's going to benefit dyslexics. It's going to benefit kids with dyscalculia, because dyscalculia is essentially dyslexia, but with numbers. And then there are many students that just are classified as having memory issues, short-term memory deficiency, long-term memory deficiency. Multiplication charts will help. It is a great tool to help build up those skills. So I highly recommend it. Now, if you guys have any other questions on how you can use a multiplication chart, or maybe other types of problems that you can use it on, just go ahead and leave it in the comments section, or contact me on my blog. I'm more than happy to show you other ways we can use this. Hopefully it helps. And again, contact me with any questions. All right, everybody, have a good day.